All right, guys, Mr. Tweet here. So in this video, I'm going to be going over the long and short run Phillips curve with you and how they're connected to aggregate demand, aggregate supply. So first thing is, if you ever have a question where you need to do side-by-side graphs of aggregate demand, aggregate supply, and the Phillips curve, the way that you should start is always start like this. So it doesn't matter if it's recession, if it's inflation, if it's full employment, whenever you have to do the side-by-side graphs of these two things, you want to start off looking like this. Now, something you should know, they have the same y-axis. Inflation, price level, they're basically the same. They're technically a little bit different, but they're close enough that we could just say that the y's are going to be the same, which means that wherever this graph is on the y-axis, this graph should match up on the y-axis. The x-axes are opposites. This one right here, this is output. This is production. This one is unemployment. This is the opposite of production. So what you see here is really and truly, this is the exact same thing. It's just mirrored across my y-axis here. That this is x getting smaller, this is x is getting bigger, this is both y. So you can think of this as like the graph of y and x, and this is the graph of y and negative x. So it's the same information, it's just flipped or it's mirrored, right? So that should help you when you go to do these side-by-side graphs with aggregate demand, aggregate supply, and Phillips curve. And in fact, many students, when they have to do a question on the Phillips curve, they'll do aggregate supply, aggregate demand with it, even though it's not required. You can even do that on the AP test. That if there's a question that says, hey, here's the economy, it's currently in a recession, draw the short and long run Phillips curve that go with that. You can draw aggregate demand, aggregate supply right next to it if you want, and then just scribble it off when you're done or whatever, right? But aggregate supply, aggregate demand, Phillips curve, we start with the big X and just the line. Step 2, right? Before we put our long run curves on here, we want to establish the short run equilibrium. So the way that you do that is you go you line up your those two lines right there so that you have your, like, basically they're synced on the y-axis. So this is like my current price level. I'm going to put here, this is my, oops, that's going to be my current output. Short run aggregate supply, aggregate demand, label short run Phillips curve. We're going to label that unemployment. We're going to label this inflation. This is my current inflation level. And then that's my current unemployment level. So what we have here is we have two side-by-side graphs and they're matched up. Now, when we have, if we wanted to, let's say that we had to draw a recessionary gap. So the question said, start off with a recessionary gap. Cool. I'm starting with a recessionary gap, right? I got to remember over here, that means my current output is less than my full employment output. So there's full employment. So then I put my long run aggregate supply right there, right? Well, see how this is to the right? Because this is mirrored, my full employment, right? My full employment, unemployment level, what we call the natural rate of unemployment. Long run Phillips curve looks like that. So they're mirrored, right? That my long run curve is to the right of the intersection on aggregate demand, aggregate supply. It's going to be left of my point on the Phillips curve because they're mirrors of each other. Basically, these are the exact same two graphs. The only difference is, number one, this one is mirrored. Number two, aggregate demand isn't shown on it. It just is showing really the supply. That's all that it's really doing. So This graph right here, the mirror of this one right here. So then when we start having anything that changes over here, right? Let's say that we have an increase in aggregate demand. Boom. Aggregate demand increases to the right. Price level. Now, aggregate demand increases to the right. I find my new intersection point. What happens over here? Well, over here, right, there is no shift. Because remember, when there's a shift to aggregate demand, we get a move on the Phillips curve. Where does my move go to? Well, the Y's still line up. So there you go. Notice that I'm at full employment on this graph. I'm at full employment on this graph. They mirror each other. They match. That's exactly what we want right there. We'll label this point B. We'll label that my new inflation level. My new unemployment level. There you go. So that's how you do the side-by-side graphs. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to take you through kind of a little bit of a longer question from beginning to end, and then that's it. So let's say we get a question that says side-by-side graphs of aggregate demand, aggregate supply, and the Phillips curve. All right. So again, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw my axes. I'm going to line up. Right? I want my x-axis to be lined up. So my two graphs are lined up next to each other. Next, making a big X and making my short run Phillips curve. Right? This is my aggregate demand, aggregate supply. This over here is going to be my Phillips curve. Now, let's say that this question says that we're at long run, we're starting off at full employment. Cool, starting off at full employment. Before we do anything, we want to line these two graphs up. Just like that, right? We're going to line these two up. So this is my current price level. That's my current inflation level. If we're at full employment, then that means my long run curve is going to go right through that intersection point. Which means over here, where my economy currently is, my long run curve has to go right through that point as well. So we're mirroring. Again, this is just a mirror image, this and this, only aggregate demand, which would be going like this. Aggregate demand is just not shown on this graph right here. It just isn't included. I'm going to label my short run aggregate supply, label my long run Phillips curve. My short run Phillips curve is labeled. This axis down here, unemployment. We always label the long run Phillips curve. It always sits at the natural rate of unemployment, which is the amount of unemployment we have when our economy is at full employment. This is YFE. This is real GDP and long run aggregate supply. So I've got everything labeled. I've got my side-by-side graphs, right? Now, common question that you might get, right? Similar, just like we saw in Unit 5, what happens in the short run when there's a change? What happens in the long run when there's a change? You could get the same thing in Unit 6, but now we've got this other graph to show with it. So, all right, what's going to happen in the short run? What's going to happen in the long run if we have a change? Remember, 90% of the time in the short run, it's aggregate demand that's going to create the disequilibrium, right? So let's go through and let's do that. So let's say that we have businesses are feeling positive about the future, that they believe profits are going to be higher over the next few years. So businesses start investing more because they think there's going to be more profit to be gained. So aggregate demand increases. Aggregate demand increases. Find your new intersection point. PL1, Y1. Down here, we're going to say in the short run, price level is going up, output is going up, unemployment is going down. Now, aggregate demand shifts over here. We get a move on this graph over here. And remember, to find where the move goes, you just bring the price line across. They got to line up. So there's my new inflation amount. We find our new point, we're gonna label the new point B, and then we're gonna bring that down. So you've got unemployment 1 right there, right? Over here in the short run, right? Inflation is going up, unemployment is going down, just like what we saw over here, right? So that's the short run. And then the next step is when you get that question that says, assume the government takes no policy action. Assume the government does nothing, right? What's gonna happen in the long run? So if we assume that the government does nothing, what's gonna happen? Well, remember, in the long run, the only thing that changes is wages. Wages and resource prices adjust. So price levels going up, output's going up, right? We need more resources, the price level's rising, unemployment's going down. We're gonna see an increase in wages. So when we have our increase in wages, what that's gonna do is that's gonna decrease our short run. So in the long run, wages and other resource prices are gonna go up. So that causes my short run aggregate supply to decrease. Boom, here we are, back at full employment. I label my new price level, PL2, and I'm back at full employment. What do we do over here, right? Remember that these two graphs are mirrors of each other. So if short run aggregate supply is shifting one way, right? If it's shifting to the left, then that means over here, my short run Phillips curve is gonna have to shift to the right. So my short run curve is gonna shift to the right. Now, how far is it gonna shift? Here's the thing. My price levels have to line up. If I'm at full employment here, I have to be at the natural rate of unemployment over there because that's what the natural rate of unemployment means. So I'm gonna go. That's gonna be my new point right there. On the long run Phillips curve, because it's at full employment, lined up with price level 2, so we'll call that inflation 2. That's where my short run Phillips curve has got to shift to, right? Notice how they mirror each other. Short run aggregate supply shifts to the left. Short run Phillips curve shifts to the right. And there we go. So that's our Phillips curve and our aggregate demand, aggregate supply model side-by-side graphs. I know this is kind of a long video, but if you understand the side-by-side and how to do that, then when you do the stuff over here, it helps you know what to do over here. So that in the long run, what we see on this graph is we're back at full employment. My price level has increased. Over here, we're back at the natural rate of unemployment. My inflation has gone up. So that what we see over here matches what we have over here, exactly what we wanted. So that's my long run and short run Phillips curve side by side with the aggregate demand, aggregate supply model. It's in the last couple of years, they've asked questions about this on the AAP test. It's definitely something that you need to know. So I hope that helped.